All right, we're gonna look at mobility first. So trunk rotation, it's average but a little tight. So what that means is as your hips are opening, you're gonna have a hard time keeping your shoulders closed. Hip abduction's tight, so you're gonna have a hard time moving laterally. So abduction was this. So you're gonna have a hard time going sideways. So what happens is you'll get stuck and then you'll wanna rotate early. Your ankles are a little tight, specifically on your right ankle. So your drive ankle. Could be some lower leg weakness. Your right internal's tight, so that femur right there is gonna have a hard, so what that femur has to rotate like this for the pelvis to come around. So you're gonna be stuck at about 15 degrees. So it's gonna be hard for your pelvis to come around. It's probably gonna stop. Okay. Your hip flexion's average. So that's gonna affect how your trunk gets over your front leg. So you might have some weakness there. Hip extension's tight. So if you hit a full stride, you're gonna have a hard time getting your hip open. So you got two things working against your hip rotation. You have tight internal, which would allow it to swivel around, and you have tight hip extension, which would affect how the femur pushes it forward.
Things I need to push around.
For what?
Those are both things I need to rotate to.
Right. So exactly. So what happens is your hips are gonna get stuck. Right. So your hips are gonna get stuck halfway through the movement, and that's gonna affect how well you're driving energy up your body. The hips get stuck, and the upper body winds up coming into where the glove will start pulling, and your grip strength's down or poor. I mean, for your age, it's probably average, a little below average. But if you want to get to the 90s, this definitely has to go up. So that's coming out of your leg lift. Okay, so coming out of your leg lift, you do squat. So I like how you're lowering your center of mass, but notice how your lift leg is quick to try to extend out. So what you're dealing with is you're really not building momentum well. So that's why you're kind of reaching with your lift leg to try to help you kind of go forward. It could be, why are you doing this? Could be to fall more. What I try to get the guys to do is forward and down at the same rate. So kind of falling a little bit more aggressively. You're probably not doing that because of the hip tightness.
Yeah.
So it's if your body knows it can't go somewhere, it tries to go another way. So that's probably why. So you can see, you get stuck here, and this starts reaching. See how that's reaching way out there? And this is now following. It should be the other way around. This should be more passive, closer. This should be trying to get down, get linear, and this should be propelling and pushing the hips and the lower half through. So you can see the front side was opening, reaching, because it's over rotated, right? It's turning now towards the first base dugout. So you're hitting front foot, and we can see the hips have come around, but not much, not a lot of momentum, and not a lot of separation. So what I was showing you about the hips and the trunk, remember the trunk rotation? It's making it hard for you to separate. So if we look at kinematic sequence, and there's exactly what we were talking about in your mobility. So this is looking at speeds through each segment. So just like on the avatar, the red is your hip, the green is your trunk. This is time, this is degrees per second. So if something's going quick, it's going up and down really fast. You can see the hip, as you reach out, the hips, trunk, all start rotating. And then right here, you flatten out. So like I said, if something's moving really fast, it's just going up and down. Now you got this flattened hip speed, which means right here, your hips ran out of energy. Well, why did it run out of energy? More likely because you're so tight. So it shuts off at this point. So you're not going to find elite pitchers at this point shutting off their hip power, right? And that's what's going to happen is you're going to have to overcompensate. So the blue line is your glove. Now, it's not pulling too bad. It's because it's moving with your trunk, and I like it to move with your trunk. I don't like it to try to pull ahead of your trunk. It'll usually peak first and peak higher. So I wouldn't say you're pulling your glove too bad, but what's happening is everything's coming around together. So as you can see, the trunk peak and the glove peak is where the hip peak should have been. And if we would have put the hip peak there, we would have had a better chance of pushing the hip or the trunk peak later. So elite pitchers are going to have larger margins between these peaks, because that's the kinetic sequence, right? They're going to sequence the chain better. So they're going to go hip peak, then to trunk glove peak, then to arm peak, right? The yellow's the arm peak. So you can see from hip to trunk, it's all stacked, and then you jump to your arm. We've got to put the hip or the trunk in the middle here, kind of like building a ramp up, right? So things that are going to allow that is not getting to that point where you stop and your lift leg starts reaching. We've got to keep our momentum going, but we've got to get your hip mobility where it needs to be to allow that. And a lot of that's weakness. A lot of the tightness is really just weakness. So we've got to get the hips stronger, the core stronger. So then when we get to this position right here, we don't get stuck. And then the upper body just goes early. Here's when you're out of sequence, here's a problem, is throwing arm will try to delay. So just like a whip. If we threw the whole whip at once, it wouldn't be as powerful, right? But if we threw the end of the whip back and then let it all build up together, it pushes energy up more. So what's happening is, because your trunk didn't stay back, your arm's trying to stay back to wait for that energy. Problem is, when your elbow goes behind your back, it's extremely hard in your arm. So at this point, you're concerned about your shoulder and you're concerned about your elbow, because you're delaying pronation. And when you pull the elbow back like this, it opens up the UCL. That's why we want the elbow to more do this than to do that, right? So then you can see when you get to release, because everything comes together, you have to over-rotate to release. If they're separate, then that throws the trunk forward, and then you get the more forward trunk. You get the arm internally rotating as the trunk is coming around, not the trunk going all the way around and then the arm trying to rotate. So you'll get a much better finish when you separate those hips to shoulders. Okay? So it's really going back to the drawing board and learning how to sit, load, ride the mound with better hips, power your backside to separate, and then translate all that forward. And that's what you're going to work on.